Amidst the American Civil War's challenges, wearing ragged clothes, worn shoes, enduring battles, fires, hunger and despair, I find my regiment marching within 10 miles of my home. Do I desert for the comfort of home, risking death, or stay loyal, facing probable demise? Today we will discuss some of the worst punishments during the Civil War. The laws governing military discipline, established before the Civil War, were designed for a smaller professional military. They operated with a rigid caste system, using shame and physical punishment for maintaining order. However, when large numbers of civilian volunteers joined the great armies and navies, this way of life was revealed them for the first time. Trouble resulted. Flogging. Flogging was a punishment used by soldiers in both the Union and Confederate armies. It involved hitting someone with a whip or lash as a penalty for doing something wrong. Soldiers could be flogged for different reasons, like disobeying orders, leaving without permission, being drunk, or not following the rules of the army. The number of hits with the whip could change depending on how bad the mistake was. Sometimes, soldiers were flogged in front of others as a warning to make everyone behave. But not everyone liked this punishment. Some people thought it made soldiers feel bad and made them less likely to fight well. At the beginning of the war, flogging was a legal punishment, but it was banned in the U.S. Army in August 1861 and in the Confederate Army in August 1862. Thereafter, officers did occasionally have their men flogged, but this usually ended up with the officer facing a court-martial. Branding, however, remained legal throughout the war. When someone messed up, they would occasionally use a hot iron to brand the first letter of their offense on their forehead, cheek, palm, or hip. D for deserter, C for cowardice, T for thief, or W for worthlessness. Bucking and gagging. Both sides of the Civil War faced great difficulties keeping their soldiers disciplined. Some officers used the cruel and humiliating technique known as bucking and gagging to control unruly troops. Under this penalty, the mischief maker would have to sit for long periods bent forward with his hands tied at his shins, his feet tied together at the ankles, and to top it all off, a rod or stick was shoved over the arms and under the knees, and he was gagged with a cloth. You probably want to hear the worst part. Shockingly, even minor offenses such as insubordination warranted this severe and degrading punishment. Charles Winder, the Confederate Army's brigadier general, had served as an officer in the antebellum United States Army and was in charge of 5 volunteer regiments. 30 men from his brigade were gagged and bucked at one point for straggling during the Second Bull Run campaign. They took the corporal punishment badly. Half of them deserted that night. The rest swore Winder's next battle would be his last. They never had a chance to carry out their threat. Federals killed Winder during the next battle. The next punishment takes its origins from the colonial period, riding the Spanish donkey or wooden mule. One of the most horrifying torture devices ever created is the wooden mule, which consists of a narrow rail raised just far enough so that the victim's feet cannot touch the ground. The accused would have to sit on the wooden mule until he passed out while having weights fastened to his legs. Sometimes the wedge would indeed cut right through the victim.
There were some of our poor boys, for little infraction of the prison rules, riding what they called Morgan's mule every day. This performance was carried on under the eyes of a guard with a loaded gun and was kept up for several days, each ride lasting 2 hours each day unless the fellow fainted and fell off from pain and exhaustion. Very few were able to walk after this hellish Yankee torture, but had to be supported to their barracks.
Don't you think that we forgot about the punishments in the Navy? Continuous dousing with seawater might be the most nauseous one on our list. This punishment could lead to harsh stomach problems, especially during the unsanitary period of the Civil War. The captain of the ship administered punishments in the form of fines, additional duties, brig time, incarceration in single or double irons, food and water confinement, solitary confinement, or reduction in rank. Now answer the question from the beginning of the video: would you desert, risking everything to see your family once again? Regardless of the answer, you have to know that the severest penalties were meted out for cowardice, deserting, stealing, sleeping while guard duty, dealing with the enemy, spies, murder, and bounty jumping. In most military executions, firing squads were used. Hanging was employed in certain situations, such as when black soldiers were found guilty of raping white women. Once at the location, the prisoner was assisted in getting from the cart and frequently assisted in moving his own casket to the previously prepared grave. Subsequently, he sat atop the casket as his sentence was pronounced. The clergyman offered one more prayer and then gave him one last opportunity to speak. Some men showed bravado, one even drinking stagnant water from his own grave. Some wept or shook with fear. The condemned man was then blindfolded and his hands were tied behind him. He then knelt either before the grave or on the coffin. The provost marshal gave the command, and the firing squad fired the volley. Witnesses were appalled by what they witnessed in nearly all executions, and many were angry at their own officers. They frequently believed that the convicted man was more victim than a transgressor. Execution by firing squad or hanging could be applied as a punishment for said crimes, but frequently wearing a sign stating their guilt, soldiers were marched out of the camp, surrounded by troops holding them by arms. Their sentences were read out at the retreat parade or a special procession. Their buttons and rank insignia were torn from their uniforms, and their heads were typically shaved. Drummers beat the Rogues March, or in the Confederate Army, Yankee Doodle, exclusive punishments. People who invented these tortures must have had great imagination. Sick one, but still. One possible punishment for a prisoner would be to wear a cannonball, which weighs between 6 and 32 pounds, and be chained to one leg for a corresponding amount of time. A guy could be forced to march around the camp wearing a barrel with its top and bottom knocked off, or he could be forced to stand on a barrel for hours on end while carrying a log or maybe a sign proclaiming his offense. An artilleryman could be lashed to the spare wheel at the rear of the caisson, the caisson perhaps being driven over rough roads to add to the prisoner's discomfort. A cavalryman could be forced to ride a wooden horse or parade around camp with his saddle. An infantryman may be forced to march around camp while carrying a knapsack full of rocks. Saunas are great, but just imagine spending hours alone in a hot room with no food or drink. According to the U.S. Naval Institute, insubordination and serious irregularities among military personnel during the 1850s were punished with time spent in the sweatbox. The tying up of both thumbs to a sturdy tree limb was another traditional penalty during the American Civil War. Soldiers would be forced to hang for hours in order to atone for their small transgressions. This seems to violate both the laws of physics and human rights. During the Civil War, you might have been sentenced to a gruesome punishment of having your body spread eagle bound to a massive wooden wheel if you were found guilty of stealing, sleeping on duty, or cowardice. Civil War soldier Frank Wilson described how a cloth would be wrapped around your head to prevent you from speaking, and occasionally a wheel would be turned to induce vomiting. Soldiers who received mild punishments had to spend 5 to 6 hours strapped to a wheel in an upright position. Even now, several branches use log carries as a strength, endurance, and team-building exercise during physical therapy. However, carrying logs was a form of punishment during the Civil War. People who disobeyed little rules would have to carry a heavy wood around camp until they were unable to stand. Thanks for watching. Feel free to discuss this gruesome topic in comments, and don't forget to subscribe and press the like button.